Hello, everyone. Welcome to the webcast. My name is Christine Dursey Davis. I'm the Executive Director of the Ohio Chapter of APA and Chair of the New Urbanism Division, and I'm your webcast moderator. Today is Friday, August 19th, and we will be hearing the presentation, Smart Growth and the FAST Act Bill, the potential implications of the FAST Act from a smart growth perspective. For technical help during our webcast today, you can type your questions in the chat box found in your webcast toolbar, or you can call the 1-800 number that you see on the screen. And for your content questions related to the presentation, you can type those in the questions box, again, located in your webinar toolbar on the right of your screen. And we will answer those at the end of the presentation during the Q&A. Coming up on your screen is a list of our sponsoring chapters and divisions for 2016. Thanks to all the participating sponsors for making these webcasts possible and free to their members. Today's webcast in particular is sponsored by the Transportation Planning Division. You can learn more about them at planning.org/divisions/transportation. Coming up on your screen is a list of our upcoming webcasts. There are two on the schedule right now, but believe it or not, every Friday is booked through December. We're just still in the phase of getting everything together and getting them approved for CM credit. So please be sure to check back on our webcast webpage at ohioplanning.org/planningwebcast for more information. These sessions will start to be put on our website shortly. And to log your CM credits for attending today's webcast, just head to planning.org and sign into your My APA account. And then under CM log, you can search for CM activities, and then in that search bar, just either type in the event number or the title of today's webcast, both of which can be found on our webcast webpage at ohioplanning.org/planningwebcast. And this webcast has been approved for 1.5 CM credits for live viewing only. We do have some recorded webcasts that are available for distance education, and you can check those out again at our webpage, ohioplanning.org/planningwebcast. And like us on Facebook, Planning Webcast Series, to receive up-to-date information on our upcoming sessions. Again, check back with us on Facebook or on our webcast webpage for all those upcoming sessions throughout the rest of the year. And we are recording today's webcast, and it'll be available on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/planningwebcast. And we'll also have a PDF of the PowerPoint available on our webcast webpage after the session ends. Again, ohioplanning.org/planningwebcast. All right, so that's it for me. I'm going to turn it over to today's speaker, Joe McAndrew. Joe, it's all you.
Perfect. Thank you, Christine, and thank you all for inviting me to today's webcast on the Federal Surface Transportation Bill, known as the FAST Act. My name is Joe McAndrew. I serve as the Policy Director of Transportation for America. Here's my contact information, and I'll go ahead and have this later on in the presentation as well. A bit about us. Transportation for America is a project of Smart Growth America, a national organization working to develop inclusive and equitable communities throughout the country. Transportation for America is really the transportation component of that. We're an alliance of elected business and civic leaders throughout the country working to ensure that our local leaders have the resources that they need to provide better outcomes for the traveling public and answer the changing demands of the 21st century. We are a membership-based organization. Here's just a slight snippet of some of the organizations that we work with. Again, we work with local elected officials, chambers of commerce, NPOs, transit agencies, and civic organizations throughout the country. on a daily basis, mission-based, trying to improve the transportation programs. Today, I'm going to present on a guide that Transportation for America released in July called Falling Forward, a guide to the FAST Act. But before I get there, I'm going to go ahead and present on trends that were happening prior to the FAST Act's passage in December of 2015. Give you an overview of the FAST Act, what's in it for you and your communities, and how you can maximize it for your region's return. And then looking forward, just my opinion of what states and local communities need to consider to get smarter on transportation policy in the coming years. I start almost all my presentations with the three hard facts, though, that a lot of folks look past when they think about our transportation system. And number one, that the federal program is largely a block grant given to and controlled by your state. Most of it is formula dollars. Some of it is suballocated to our larger metropolitan regions to ultimately program through the TIP process. But most folks, most dollars are flowing to your state DOT that they control how those dollars will be split and how they may or may not share it with local and regional governments. That's why state leadership on transportation issues is all the more important than ever in the years to come. And then finally, and this is important to note, there will never be enough money to pay for every need, want, and desire that you and your colleagues in your state have. So we need to just start to develop programs and policies to make sure that we're spending the money wisely on the desired outcomes from our scarce resources. So the biggest item heading into the FAST Act that I will, give you the information now off the bat that we didn't really fully address was the crisis in funding. The Highway Trust Fund has a structural deficit that, as you can see here in the slide, was going down in the red, and we were going to go over a fiscal cliff back in 2015, and we had a transfusion of general fund dollars of $8.1 billion. Heading into the passage of the FAST Act, we were looking at it again, and rather than address issues around transportation revenue from the gas tax or others, we went ahead and did another large general fund transfer, pulling money from other programs and or just deficit expenditures that your kids and your grandchildren will have to pay for years to come, putting us in a worse place when the bill is done. As I highlighted, we haven't touched the gas tax since 1993. It's been static at 18.4 cents per gallon over that time period, meaning that we've lost nearly 40% of the purchasing power. So that's an issue that we have with the actual funding for the program. The next one is that we've got a different demand for our transportation system than we've had in years past, and it's largely being driven by millennials and the aging baby boomer population. Millennials, as of last year, became the largest share of the workforce, and millennials are ultimately changing the way that they go ahead and decide to move around the country in ways that their parents didn't. Millennials are really choosing where to live before finding a job, and as you can see here, 4 out of 5 millennials want to live in places with transportation options to get to jobs, schools, and daily needs. This is important because a region's most important source of competitive advantage is ultimately its workforce. In the past, it was employers that attracted workers, but now, according to many studies, it's the pools of talent that attracts the firm. This is really, really important to note as we start to think about economic development strategies, and one of the major underlying components to that attraction for millennials is the transportation options, the multimodal transportation options available to them in different communities, large and small. And this is being recognized by our businesses throughout the country. Here you've got the Marriott CEO last year stating that their lease is coming up in a suburban Washington, D.C. suburb, inner ring suburb that doesn't have great transit access, and they're looking to move. They might stay where they are in the neighborhood, but they've got to have metro access to be able to attract the talent that they need. On a smaller scale, here in the Portland, Oregon region, a business moved from Vancouver to downtown Portland, recognizing that they needed that talent that was available to them in downtown Portland to ultimately thrive. This isn't just happening in Washington, D.C., and it's not just happening in Portland, it's happening throughout the country. My colleagues at Smart Growth America did a study last year tracking 500 businesses that had chosen to move, and by and large, a lot of it was talent attraction, and they were moving to areas with better walk and bike score. While all this is going on as well, we've got a major disruption in how people are getting around on their daily commutes. We've got Car2Go, Ride Scout, Bike Share, you name it, popping up every day, and these market shares are only increasing. On top of that, we were able to really, if Congress was willing, was able to really learn from the states that were leading the way heading up to 2015. 23 states that we had tracked had moved to raise transportation funding. And of those states that had primaries after they had raised funds, 98% of those that voted yes in those states actually won their next primary. I think this is a really important thing to note, because a lot of folks, especially here in Washington, D.C., are afraid to talk about a gas tax increase because they're afraid that it's going to be the end of their congressional career. But in fact, one item that we know is that Americans have a short attention span, and the other one is that if you can explain the vote and why you took it and the importance for it, the American electorate will be supportive. So these are just some of the trends that were leading up to the FAST Act and in the passage last December. And so how did Congress respond? In our humble opinion, we believe that it was a very status quo type of bill that maintained some items but made some positive changes in areas in other areas. We really wish that they had gone a little bit farther, however. The FAST Act, for your overview, is called the Fixing America's Surface Transportation Act. It was passed in December of 2015 but had a retroactive date of October 1, 2015. And it's a 5-year funding bill that ultimately goes through FY.
Hey Joe, I don't know if you can hear us or not, but it looks like the audio went out for you. Can you, sorry everybody, oops. I think he lost his internet, everybody. Give us a few seconds.
Hello?
There you are. Welcome back.
Apologize about that. I don't know what happened. My internet's working here.
Yeah, well, that's good. Yeah, your voice went out first, and then you went out after.
Okay.
Do you have your PowerPoint up?
I do.
Okay, I'm just going to change the presentation back to you. So it's going to ask you again for the pop-up. Yeah.
Perfect.
Thank you. Okay, we're back in action, folks.
Sorry about that, everyone. So the FAST Act, there's a lot of things that they could have done, in our opinion. We are big proponents and supporters of enabling and empowering our local and regional governments to be able to invest their transportation dollars as they see fit. But this bill really, by and large, maintained the status quo, especially around maintaining the funding at the state level. It did shore up the federal funding for now, but as I'll discuss in a few slides coming up, there was no long-term certainty and not enough to get us out of the backlog that many states and local governments face. So the bill is a 5-year bill, as I stated. It provides $305 billion over those 5 years. Some of the bigger items that I think that to note off the bat is that for the first time ever, this bill incorporates the passenger rail title into the surface transportation bill. So traditionally it's been a highway, transit, and a few other programs type of bill, but as we recognized in many places, passenger rail also moves on the surface. So this was brought into the bill, and I'll highlight that in a little bit. It adds a new highway freight formula and discretionary grant program for freight, and it maintains the earmark ban that was put in place a number of years ago. On the funding side, $281 billion of the $305 billion over the next 5 years is provided by the Highway Trust Fund. That's guaranteed money that will be there, that you can count on and that you can plan for. $24 billion is going to come through the general appropriations process, and that is by and large our FTA New Starts Capital Construction Grant Program and the authorized passenger rail funding levels, which does not have any funding dedicated to it through the Highway Trust Fund. This bill also maintains the historic 80-20 split of funds coming out of the Highway Trust Fund for highways and transit programs. So one of the bigger items that we took issue with at Transportation for America was actually the way in which this bill is funded. Highlighted on the slide previous, they had transferred about $71 billion from 2008 to 2015 to keep the Highway Trust Fund and ultimately the Surface Transportation Program solvent. Starting in 2016 through 2020, actually this year alone, we're transferring all of that $70 billion that we found or we pulled over from the general fund to the Highway Trust Fund in the FAST Act. So in total, we're going to have spent about $140 billion from 2008 to 2020 to maintain the solvency of our Highway Trust Fund, but it doesn't necessarily address the structural deficit. To put this into perspective for everybody, since Amtrak was created in 1971 as the nation's passenger rail corporation, Congress has provided them just $70 billion in total federal funding when adjusted for inflation. It's really a question about priorities here and how we want to fund and invest our transportation dollars at the end of the day. To give you a more stark look here, here's a chart from the Congressional Budget Office. That bump in 2016 is the $70 billion transfer. And what you can see here is that we're gradually going to spend more than we're taking in. This deficit is only going to get worse as vehicles start to go farther on even less gasoline as well. But so here's the $70 billion general fund transfer. In 2020, you can see here, our outlays on the right are going to farther exceed the receipts coming in from the gas tax and other fees. And in 2021, we're going to be estimating to bring in $41 billion, but spending $59 billion. It's only going to get worse in years to come. And there's no real direction or sign that Congress really wants to address this. And so in our report that we released, we actually started to ask the question of whether or not the trust fund is dead, whether or not we should start to look at alternatives and means to go ahead and pay for our transportation program. Here in the report, you can see there's a breakdown of funding Just to give you an idea, there wasn't a big shakeup in terms of programs. MAP 21 had consolidated a lot of programs into core highway programs or core transit programs. They didn't really do that this time. But what you see is a bump up of about 8% in FY 2016 this year, and then we're going to see a flat increase based on inflation over the out years, the last 4 years of this bill. One item to note for many folks, and I imagine many folks have heard about the Fast Lane program and the funding that was released recently in that. A big push for both the House and the Senate was the idea that we needed to ultimately fund a freight program. So they, through the amount of money that they transferred from the general fund, they ultimately took a large share of that and put it into their freight programs, one of which is a freight formula program. As you can see, it's a little over $1 billion, rising ever so slightly up to FY 2020. This funding is based on current highway formulas and has absolutely no connection to the value or the tonnage of freight that moves through your state. It is not a smart investment in our opinion, because it's by and large going to fund the same types of roads that your National Highway Performance Program would. And then finally, it predetermines which freight projects are best by requiring that 90% of your state's funding go to highways and not other freight transportation options. The next program it was titled in the FAST Act the Nationally Significant Freight and Highway Program. It's actually called the Fast Lane, according to Secretary Fox and those folks. It's a discretionary grant program, guaranteed money in a way that Tiger is not. Tiger, each year we have to hit and hope and pray that we're going to get funding through the appropriations process. But this one is guaranteed. The money comes from the Highway Trust Fund. Last year's program had about $800 million. The big winner, for those folks in Virginia, congratulations.
Hi, Joe. We can't hear you again. Hold on, everybody. While we're waiting for Joe to log back in, I'm not sure what's going on with his internet. Sorry, everyone. A couple people have questioned in if this will be available for download. And again, yes, the PowerPoint will be available as a PDF after the webcast ends. If you just head to our webcast webpage, ohioplanning.org/planningwebcast, you can download a copy of the presentation.
All right, I just called them.
Oh, hi, okay.
Hey, I'm not sure what's happening here, but it looks like I can still control the slides here. Has
Give
everyone
it a
seen that?
try, because I'm not sure. Try going to your next slide.
I did. It's showing
Okay.
it on my screen, but is it for you?
No,
Okay. Let me go ahead and just log. I apologize. Stop sharing the screen. I'm going to go ahead and log out and come back in.
Okay, that sounds good. Just as a reminder, Joe is trying to log back in. His internet is acting up. He'll be back on shortly, so just hold tight.
Hello?
Hello.
All right. It looks like I'm back in. I apologize for that.
Okay, that's fine. I'm going to go ahead and give you the controls back.
Perfect. Can you see that?
Yep.
All right. Perfect. All right. Sorry about that, everyone. So I was talking about the freight discretionary grant program before. getting cut out there with our Wi-Fi. Apologies. But this program resembles Tiger in a way, but it is not nearly as broad in terms of being able to fund every transportation mode available. This program, as envisioned by Congress, was also just to fund our mega projects, our mega billion-dollar projects throughout the country, if possible. The one item that we have is that it actually, again, predetermines what type of transportation mode should receive funds by limiting the amount of funding over the life of the program, over the 5 years, that can be spent on non-highway freight projects to just $500 million. We worked with our friends in Maryland after they were a little upset that they didn't get any funding. They've got a great freight tunnel project coming out of the port that is limited to single stacks rather than double stacks, and they were seeking funding. But at the end of the day, they were asking for, by and large, a large share of this $500 million that Congress put a cap on it. So we would like to see this cap removed. It's something that we think that Congress could do in the coming years through the appropriations process if they so chose. To put this a finer point on this, here's the amount of money that is expected to come through the Fast Lane Discretionary Grant Program. And I just picked out Oregon, having spent some time there, giving you an example of how much money the state of Oregon is likely to receive. Sorry, this is the Freight Formula Program, is expected to receive $79.8 million, almost $80 million, of which they can spend just $8 million on non-highway freight projects required by the FAST Act. I've already indicated this before, but we're big proponents of opportunities for further local empowerment through the transportation program. We worked hard leading up to the bill's passage to try to engage many folks throughout the country around a bill, the Innovation and Surface Transportation Act, that we were trying to really kind of establish state-based Tiger programs, if possible, was kind of the broad structure. Came close, but at the end of the day, it was probably too big of a change for most folks to accept in a bill such as the one that passed. So where we ended up was a few smaller structural changes. First and foremost, don't get afraid. They changed the name of the Surface Transportation Program. This is the primary program that provides funds through the sub-allocation process down to our NPOs. They changed it from the Surface Transportation Program to the Surface Transportation Block Grant Program, but there are absolutely no structural changes other than rolling the TAP program into this program, and I'll talk about that on another slide here in a second. But the TAP program has now been brought structurally within the STBG. One item that they went ahead and changed was increasing the percent of funding for the entire pot going to our regional NPOs and away from the state DOT. Right now it's 50-50 split, and what they ended up doing was increasing by 1% per year the amount of money going to the NPOs through the sub-allocation process. That comes out to about $3.4 billion over the life of the bill. They also went ahead and lowered the TIFIA project costs to receive the low-interest long-term financing available through the TIFIA program from $50 million down to $10 million. One of our biggest upsets, I've highlighted this program before, but we are big proponents of the TIGER program, the discretionary multimodal pot of funds that's available on an annual basis and has been since the Recovery Act passed in 2009. We believe that this program is highly popular. It incentivizes better outcomes, and unfortunately it's underfunded to meet the need today. Next up is transit. Transit saw a lot of changes in MAP 21, the predecessor to the FAST Act that passed in the summer of 2012. So there weren't a lot of changes to see in this program actually this go around. And a lot of the questions were around funding and a little bit of a spat between our Northeast Corridor friends and those folks not on the Northeast Corridor. But by and large, the majority of these funds flow through transit formulas. The blue pie chart there is the capital New Starts Capital Grant Program. That is funding, again, that has to come through the appropriations process and is not guaranteed. Highlighting it here, similar funding structures as we saw with the highway program, 8% increase in the first year, and then we're seeing flat inflationary growth over that time period. I'll highlight a few things that were changed, though. Many folks, especially areas, many big and small transit agencies were having issues maintaining their buses. In the MAP 21, they took away the discretionary grant program to the bus and bus facilities and went ahead and put all the money through a formula dollar program. And what was being found was there wasn't enough large chunks of money to really replace a whole bus fleet or a large portion of a bus fleet at a given time. So a major push for many of the transit advocates throughout the country was to put money back into the bus and bus facilities program. That was going to come at the expense of the fast-growing high-density program up above. That's at least what happened on the House floor. And at the end of the day, through negotiations, we were able to get both the fast-growing high-density program that supports, by and large, the states on the Northeast Corridor. But then we also got the bus and bus facilities discretionary grant program back at $304 million, which ultimately allows folks to invest in bus and bus maintenance, low and no emission buses, or bus station improvements. Other items to note, the transit formula grants, they removed the percentage that folks have to spend. If you're over $200,000 prior to the FAST Act, you were required to spend 1% of your formula dollars in urbanized areas on what was called transit enhancements. These can be bike, ped, accessibility types of enhancements, among others. They went ahead and removed that restriction going forward. Within the capital construction grant program, this is your new starts, your small starts, which oftentimes is being cited for BRT and other types of smaller transit projects or core capacity expansions. They went ahead and decreased the federal match to 60% for new starts. That is been pretty historic or been pretty common in the last couple of years in terms of how much FTA is willing to spend for a new starts grant. So not a lot's changed. They've just gone ahead and put it in code. One item to note, if you're looking for a bus rapid transit project, they went ahead and increased the amount that you could receive from a project cost from $75 million to $100 million, and increased the total project cost, from the grant, but then they increased the total project cost by $50 million up to $300 million as well. Within the bus and bus facilities, as I highlighted, we've got a discretionary grant program. And then I will highlight this in a slide coming up here in a second, but we've got the transit-oriented development financing within TIFIA and RIF, but we were able to continue our TOD pilot planning program that was authorized in MAP 21, so $10 million per year to support areas of the country that are trying to get into the capital construction grant program to think about the surrounding land uses for that transit line. Traditionally, what FTA, the Federal Transit Administration, has done since the passage of MAP 21 is go ahead and hold up that $10 million over a 2-year cycle. So they'll go ahead and announce $20 million of planning grants at a given time. We would expect them to keep doing that unless the future administration decides to change course. Within active transportation, this was one of the more debated questions that we saw coming up to the passage of the bill. The biggest change, I think, to note is that TAP, the Transportation Alternatives Program that was created by MAP 21, is not a program anymore. Instead, it's within the Surface Transportation Block Grant Program, but nothing structural has changed. This was a move by the folks in the House, mostly at the behest and the request of the more conservative members in the majority to try to kill or do away with bicycle and pedestrian assistance. So what they did was they went ahead and tucked it within another program, and they were able to say that no money is going to bike ped projects or the like. It's creative, but at the end of the day, we still have our program. One item that they did do was they removed the program from an inflationary growth found in other programs like the Surface Transportation Program and the like, and went ahead and put it on more static increases. The first 2 years, we're going to see $830 million. That's about an $8 million increase from where we're at today or last year. And then it's going to rise to $850 million in FY18 through FY20. This still amounts to about 2% of the entire federal highway annual budget, so not that much at the end of the day. MPOs with populations over 200,000 can flex up to 50% of the funds that they receive for their competitive TAP programs to non-bicycle and pedestrian projects if they so choose. That's a new eligibility that was not permitted prior to the FAST Act. Some of the bigger changes, I think, is around the design of our streets. We know that we work here with the National Complete Streets Coalition. Building a complete street is important both for the economic development but also creating a safe and accessible environment. And probably the biggest change here to note for folks is that any funds on the NHS, the National Highway System, must now account for all road users. It was a may before, it's now a shall. It's required by law that all designs, reconstructions, rehabs of a road, and constructions have to account for all users. That was not a requirement before, but it is now. So if it's not happening in your region, let us know. We'd love to help you out and make sure that you guys are on solid ground to make sure that all users are being accounted for. Another item of note is that they're required to use NACDO's Urban Design Guide Manual when developing our national design standards. It encourages, it doesn't require, but it encourages states and MPOs to adopt complete streets language and encourages the DOT to provide technical assistance to these programs as well. And then finally, if you are a local government that is accessing federal funds directly and have a design guide different from your state DOT, and you are the project manager, you actually can use your design guide if it differs from the state DOT. This would likely come in the form of sub-allocated funds potentially if you are controlling the project or if you are receiving Tiger grant funding as well. On the financing side, this is big to note. TIFIA is the low-interest, long-term favorable loan program for transportation infrastructure on the highway and transit side. We increased the program from about $250 million prior to the passage of MAP 21 in 2012 to $1 billion per year. This year, to save money and spend money on freight programs and others, we went ahead and cut that back down to about where we were before, down to about 275 to 300 million, not billion, sorry, million per year over the life of the bill. One item that we pushed very hard was encouraging transit-oriented developments or making it eligible for transit-oriented developments to be able to access this program as well as the railroad equivalent, the Railroad Infrastructure Financing Program. So now if you are working on a station improvement or a transit project and the developer is within distance, the developer can work with the public agency to access low-interest loans for TOD types of infrastructure improvements as well as, in certain instances, actual capital construction on projects. This is a big opportunity, and we think that it's one that's beneficial in maximizing the investments, especially in transit and railroad infrastructure improvements. I already highlighted it, but it lowers the local match to $10 million. It also lowers the transit-oriented development match to $10 million. They have created a one-stop shop called the National Surface Transportation and Innovative Financing Bureau, at USDOT. So if you are looking to access these programs, you can call us here. We'd love to help you out. But there's also folks at DOT that are there ready to help change state policies to support P3s or access programs as well. Finally, passenger rail. I think that this was a big change and one that's a benefit for years to come in terms of bringing passenger rail into the actual authorization program. The challenge that we have, again, is that passenger rail is tied to the annual appropriations process and is under certain times and certain presidencies capable of not receiving adequate funding. We have not received any capital construction dollars accessible to states and local governments through the passenger rail accounts since 2010. Funding for Amtrak has sustained, fortunately, but we don't have necessarily capital construction funds for other entities coming from the federal level. I think generally that there's a thawing happening in Congress. I think that there's a willingness both this year and in years to come to start to increase the amount of funds for capital construction, but I think it's going to be slow. But this bill sets us in the right direction. Specifically, 3 programs I want to highlight. They created the Consolidated Rail Infrastructure and Safety Improvements Program. This is a very broad, extensive capital construction program available to any state in the country as well as local entities to do a lot in terms of station track improvements or purchasing rolling stock. The Federal State Partnership for State of Good Repair Program, similar in scope, however it has restrictions, at least at this time, that only the Northeast Corridor states, those areas from Washington, D.C. up to Boston, can access these funds. So it's restrictive in nature in terms of geography. And then finally is the Restoration Enhancement and Grants Program. This is a smaller program at $20 million per year, supporting lines that used to be in existence, operating assistance, because right now there is no support for operating for lines under 750 miles. So if you were to start a new line that once existed or it's new in its purpose, you can actually access federal dollars to support up to 4 years of operating capital. So that's an overview of the FAST Act. We think that there's a lot of missed opportunity around Tiger, around funding, around getting better performance of our investments, as well as supporting our local needs. This bill passed, as I said, in December. We likely won't see any action from Congress again until 2020. So the question is, how do we go ahead and maximize and achieve success at our local and state level? And I really think that you need to focus on the state, and that's really, as I said, Congress isn't coming back until 2020. Your state controls the lion's share of all transportation dollars, and you need to work with your state legislators, your state DOTs, and others to ensure that your money is being invested in the projects that are important to you and your people. Transportation for America has been working in this space since 2014, actually. After the election, we hosted our first Capital Ideas Conference in Denver. We had over 30 states represented, and we were working to really try to highlight what was successful, what was losing at state levels, and what we thought was innovative that can be pushed broader than just raising the gas tax, because at the end of the day, raising the gas tax may not achieve better outcomes in terms of how those dollars are spent. We've continued to work with state legislators and stakeholders and local elected officials since then on state funding packages to policies and learning from them. And we released this report in early 2016 on innovations that we think folks should consider at the state level. And these are based on what other states have done. They range from increasing accountability and transparency to building taxpayer confidence. I think that this is important, and I'll highlight one program in Virginia here in a second. The next one is that we need to make our states economically competitive and empower locals to do the same. This is, while we might have great flexibility at the federal level to spend funding on highways and transit, there are actually about 30 states in the country that restrict the ability for funding from gas taxes and the like to go towards transit or other programs. there's different ways to get around this here. Other items that we highlighted was investing in innovation and rewarding the smartest project, competitive grant programs, and the like, maximizing savings through better project development, and improving safety through better street design. I'm going to go ahead and highlight 2 state programs here. The first one is improving accountability by measuring performance. Governor Terry McAuliffe signed into law in 2014 HB 2. This bill passed the year after Virginia raised transportation revenue, and Governor McAuliffe was very interested in making sure that there was great transparency and accountability and trust from the taxpayers, that their money, the more money that they were paying into the trust fund was going to be spent on priorities for them. And the conservatives in the legislature were very concerned about making sure that they were able to show value for taking the tough vote and get cover ultimately. So HB 2 is a project selection performance-driven program that looks at 6 core areas to measure your projects before they receive funds, and that's safety, congestion mitigation, accessibility, environmental protection, economic development, and land use coordination. All projects are measured against each other throughout the state, and at the end of the day, the whole attempt, while politics are always going to be at play when you make transportation investments, the attempt is to try to bring an objective decision-making process as much as we can to the process of investing billions of dollars. So they went ahead and created HB2's website here. You can go there. It's a great resource. It's a great way for people to understand how their investments are ultimately going to play out in the state. Here you can see the number of applications for the first round of funding that got underway this year. They received 321 applications for $6.95 billion in funds. They requested $6.95 billion in funds, but Virginia had a little over $1 billion to provide. They went ahead and allowed for the commission of the Transportation Department to review and analyze and accept the projects, and they accepted them in June of this year, and they are going forward and investing in these projects. And to highlight these a little bit, here's the #1 project in the state. It's a small project to improve a turning lane at an elementary school in a rural area of the state. And when looking at it, it actually doesn't score too well in terms of how the project would benefit. 1.5 is the total score, but at the end of the day, what they do is they go ahead and take each dollar invested and divide it by the amount of money that's being requested from the state. So they were requesting $150,000, taking that project benefit score, and they use it in the millions, and they were able to come up with a final score of 100.3. This was the #1 score in the state. It was a process that was able to ultimately show that rural projects can compete against urban projects, multimodal non-highway projects can compete against highway projects. Generally, there was acceptance throughout the state, and the governor and the DOT are making small tweaks to it, but they are going to continue to move forward, and there's better understanding, if you're a local or elected a leader, how you're ultimately judged and scored to receive funds, and it's less of a horse trading type of exercise. The next program that I want to highlight is a program in Massachusetts. It's the Complete Streets program. For a very small amount of money, the Massachusetts DOT and the governor's office are ultimately incentivizing the outcomes that they're seeking in terms of policy. They've had a Complete Streets policy on the book for a while, but what they ultimately did was put a little bit of money into a program to incent local communities to both adopt Complete Streets programs. Once they did that, they then were eligible to develop a strategic Complete Streets plan and prioritization process. There was funding to support that effort. Once you do that and pass that plan, you then are eligible for up to $400,000 to complete construction projects that were prioritized in the plan. I think this is really important to note because my friends at the National Complete Streets Coalition, again, they release on an annual basis the top 10 complete streets policies passed in the country, and this year I think it was 3 communities from Massachusetts actually had the best policies on the books. So it's a state taking a little bit of money to ultimately achieve the outcomes that they're seeking. This is just a little bit of a highlight in terms of what we are doing at the state level throughout the country. It's free to join our network of local elected officials, state leaders, and stakeholders. There's a link there. We also will be holding our Capital Ideas Conference in November, from November 16th to 17th in Sacramento. I invite everybody here, if you're interested in learning more about what is innovative in terms of planning and design and investments, as well as funding, consider coming. We're going to be talking about it all. So there's a link for that there as well. And with that, I'll go ahead and kick it back to Christine to open it up for questions.
Great, thank you. Everyone, don't forget to post your questions in the chat box feature in the GoToWebinar tool panel on the right of your screen. First is a comment. I guess the HB2, the Virginia HB2 has been renamed to Smart Scale. A couple folks have typed in and wanted to make mention of that. First question, the requirement that NHS roadway designs are to consider all modes, do these rules take place immediately or only with projects funded in the fiscal year that the FAST Act takes place?
That is a good question, and one that if I can get the name of the individual, I can go ahead and track down the answer. I imagine it is funding going forward. That said, if it's in the TIP and or the STIP and it hasn't been funded yet, or the construction hasn't started, you might be able to make a play at going back and trying to ask that they at least evaluate or consider all users of the transportation program.
Okay. Next question, is there funding for high-speed rail?
No, no. So the 3 programs that I highlighted, the first one, the Consolidated Grant Program, technically could fund a high-speed rail project. This year's appropriations process has been a bit slow with the election and the like, but there is $50 million for non-Amtrak passenger rail funds in the Senate bill. $20 million, I believe, if I'm correct, is going to go to that consolidated grant pot. $20 million is going to go to that program of state of good repair for the Northeast Corridor, and $10 million will go towards that restoration and enhancement grant program.
Okay. Just to clarify, because I did not hear reference to Amtrak, will planning or project development related to Amtrak also fall within the suite of funding programs that have been presented?
Yes. Yes. I think, you know, a lot of, depending on the project that you're thinking about, just to give everybody a full understanding here, in 2008, when we passed the last passenger rail authorization program, it was PREA was the acronym. They went ahead and cut lines at 750 miles for different levels of magnitude. Lines over $750 million or 750 miles are now called long-distance lines. Those are lines that are fully supported by the federal Congress and Amtrak's annual appropriations process, so long as they get enough money. Lines under 750 are what's called state-supported lines, and those are lines that in Congress's determination should be self-sustaining, and states and not the federal Congress should be paying for. These lines go across state lines in many areas of the country and are important to, I would say, the interstate commerce, yet Congress has decided that it's important for the states to pay for these. And so states may work with Amtrak. Amtrak does have money available to them depending on what the project is to support those capital construction grant programs if they so choose.
Okay, thank you. Could you expand a little bit on funding for bike and pedestrian? Some folks are having some questions about that. That was a little unclear.
Yeah, so, I mean, I think the one important thing to note is that bike and pedestrian projects are not just funded by the Transportation Alternatives Program. That's the program that a lot of people pay attention to because it's the only program that's dedicated primarily for bicycle and pedestrian projects. Bicycle and pedestrian projects are eligible for funding for just about any highway program within the program. It's really the question of whether or not your state DOT or your MPO or the elected officials that may sit on those boards want to spend different programmatic dollars on bicycle and pedestrian projects. So that, just to clear that thought up for you if you had that question. Specifically what happened in this bill, the TAP program, the Transportation Alternatives Program, exists. It continues to exist. It used to be its own separate program unto itself. What they've done here is they basically just added a subsection to, they moved it from its own independent program into another program. That transaction or transfer didn't affect TAP really in any way, shape, or form. It still acts and operates as if it's its own program, but for the purpose of writing it in the code and into law, they've basically gone ahead and put it in a separate program. It's no longer called TAP technically within law. It's now called the STBG set-aside. But it truly is TAP, the Transportation Alternatives Program. It exists. The funding is there. It acts in the same way that it acted before by and large. Not a lot's going to change. You might see at least documents coming out of DOT, US DOT, calling it something different ever so slightly. But it's going to act and operate in much the same way that it did before.
Okay, next question. Do you think that a vehicle miles traveled based funding mechanism can be considered by Congress when it considers new bill in 2020?
Fabulous question. And one item that I will note, there are two programs, discretionary pot programs, that I didn't highlight here, one of which is a VMT road usage charge pot of funding, $15 million this year, $20 million each year thereafter, for states to be able to access and test VMT and road usage charge programs. I would highlight, I would say that we're going to only move as fast as our states are willing to test and implement these programs. I don't think that Congress is ready to put their thumb down on the side of just moving full bore into a VMT or road usage charge program nationwide. I think we're going to need to see more states such as our friends out in Oregon. California is launching a pilot, I believe, this year. Washington's moving to do the same, and I think that more and more folks, at least in the western half of the United States and the Western Road Usage Charge Consortium, are really looking to those states to learn, hopefully start to work across borders to test interoperability, data sharing, as well as making sure that the security of the programs are operating. I think that there's a lot of education that has to happen. 2020 is a number of years down the road. I think that these funds, this discretionary grant program, is going to be a step in the right direction. Is it enough to really get us to where we need to be in 2020 to answer that question? Maybe. Probably not, but maybe.
Okay, next question. Is there incentive funds that focus inner city workers' needs to access jobs?
That's a fabulous question. In MAP 21, they went ahead and removed the JARC program, the Jobs Access Reverse Commute program that really kind of focused on your non-traditional shift workers accessing jobs by modes other than vehicles. They removed that. We tried to work in the planning title to planning thoughts around job connections. Unfortunately, it didn't really make it that far. There's not a lot of funding dedicated to one specific need. So it's more going to be a localized level conversation of prioritizing your funds to those types of programs. It's not to say that it's not eligible for federal funds, but it's going to be more of a regional or a state level conversation. On that note, I'm working with my friends at the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights and Policy Link and a few others to try to work to get USDOT to lead the charge on an accessibility measure around performance, talking about access by all modes of transportation to job centers and basic daily needs. We were successful in this year's appropriation to get some language encouraging DOT to do that. We're hopeful that that will pass later this year. But that's a little bit of a sidebar, but at the end of the day, there's not a lot of money or dedicated money to this specific need, and we wish that there was more.
Okay. Can you review changes in the Highway Safety Improvement Program? The person asking the question says, I've been told that HSIP funds can no longer be used on enforcement and education activities.
You know, I'll have to, can you get the name for that individual and I'll follow up with them. I think that is not 100% accurate, but I need to make sure I'm stating this correctly.
Okay, you got it. Okay, next question. Have there been any revisions to the public involvement and outreach requirements related to the FAST Act funding projects? In particular, any that might support pushing more funding towards non-highway projects?
No. I mean, on the latter part of that question, no. On the public engagement process, yes, in the sense that there are new entities that you need to consider discussing or working with in terms of starting to develop your long-range plans and your tips and steps. And those are your inner-city bus operators, your travel and tourism groups, and your commuter transportation management agencies if you have them.
Okay. Is there any federal funding for Rails to Trails?
If your state wants to continue to maintain the money that was available prior to MAP 21 for Rails to Trails, yes. But that is not a requirement, and it's really kind of on a state-by-state basis. Those funds come through the Transportation Alternatives Program. And so, you know, it can be dedicated to specific rec trails types of programs, or it can be open to a broader set of bicycle and pedestrian programs as well.
Okay. Next question. Have any changes been made to the congestion mitigation and air quality improvement program?
There were a few minor changes, but nothing too large to note at this juncture. Really, they did a few comma changes here and there.
Alrighty. How about, are there any funds dedicated to mobility planning, or will that be handled by state DOTs?
Again, that will be handled by state DOTs. I think there was a program back in the Bush administration, W. Bush, the Urban Mobility Program or Partnership Program. That was a great program, I think, for many regions of the country that were involved. That program doesn't exist today. There wasn't a major push to try to bring a program such as that back. That said, there is a program, and this was the second discretionary pot that I wanted to highlight that I didn't discuss in this slide, It's really focused on advancing the deployment of research type of program. Some people might look at it as the next step of the Smart Cities program. $60 million provided per year available for local and regional governments as well as your state DOT to really put forward innovative, advanced type of research or practice and try to move it into a deployment and testing phase. So depends how you want to look at it. Are we talking about mobility in the smart city sense? I think that would be highly competitive at this juncture within this DOT administration. But you know, there's different all kinds of different ways to look at mobility as well.
Okay. Are there any funds dedicated to innovative, out-of-the-box thinking, research and development type projects?
So that's what I would highlight as that $60 million pot of funds. It is a wonkishly long program title. That was a part of creating it, so I apologize for not remembering it, but it was something along the lines of innovative advanced deployment, and there's another couple words, program. I can send that title to you after this specific title to you. They've put out a notice of funding availability. I believe that has closed, and I expect that they will announce those awards in the coming month or so. Those funds will be available each year going forward under this bill. So if you didn't get in your application this year, or you have an innovative concept, take a look at the program and see if you think it's good for you next year. I will also highlight there's two things that I've witnessed from the DOT in the last year or 6 months, year really, that I'm not sure if the next administration will pick up, but both on the Federal Transit Administration and then also at the Office of the Secretary, they've taken old research funds to try to address innovative mobility type of questions. So at the FTA, they've gone ahead and created what they're calling the FTA Mobility Sandbox Program, working with transit agencies to really kind of innovate and test the bounds of what level of partnership you may or may not want to create with a shared use provider. One transit agency that's getting a lot of press right now is the Pinellas transit agency down in Florida, and they're working with Uber and transit and paratransit companies down there to address first and last mile issues to transit stops. I think that's really what that program is targeting, but they're taking old unused research dollars to create a pot for folks to be able to come into. This program wasn't authorized. We think it's a good program and one that we should continue to look to. The other one is the Smart Cities program. I imagine many folks on the call were either at a state level or a local level that applied. This was a program that not a lot of people had on their radar last December when it was announced, but it was one that grabbed a lot of attention and a lot of excitement and different levels of planning that I think hadn't happened before. There might have been some level of coordination or conversation happening in many regions of the country, but this really kind of crystallized it for folks. And we're working with a collaborative, is what we're calling it, the Smart Cities Collaborative, to try to work with a set of cities to really try to address those innovative questions around what is a smart city and how do we make sure that the technology that we're taking on is actually achieving the outcomes that we have, right? We're very much looking at technology, not for technology's sake, but rather how we can get better outcomes for the people that we're looking to serve. But again, Smart City, $60 million was old research money, $40 million, old research money that they just pulled together and created a new program pretty quickly.
Okay. Could you talk more about how road user charging is included in the FAST Act?
Say that one more time, sorry?
Could you talk a little about how road user charging is included in the FAST Act?
So road using charge and VMT, vehicle miles traveled, is really kind of one and the same, depending on how you want to title it. So my answer to the VMT question in terms of the discretionary grant program available is about it. There hasn't been much more done in that space, but they're putting dollars out there for states to test and ultimately, hopefully, entice more states to test and pilot road usage charge, VMT charge programs throughout the country.
Okay. Do you foresee any future requirements for greenhouse gas emission reductions from the transportation network?
Oh, fabulous question, and one that I'm really glad that came up.
Oh, good.
So yes, and I think that we're going to get something out of the Obama administration before he's said and done. So if you all follow Smart Growth America or Transportation for America, one item that we worked hard on in MAP 21 was the establishment of the performance measure program. We wish that it had gone a little bit farther and had tied the performance measures to funding, but that was pulled out at the last second. But that said, we've got, for the first time ever, a framework to measure performance. The final set of rules are out, measuring everything from congestion to system performance to on-road mobile source emissions. Within this rule, US DOT has asked the public if they should measure greenhouse gases. And if they do, they would require state DOTs and NPOs throughout the country to measure their greenhouse gases from their transportation program and set targets to try to reduce the greenhouse gases from their transportation program. The rule closes tomorrow, actually, and I've worked very closely with many state DOTs, NPOs, transit agencies, local agencies, and civic organizations, including environmental organizations throughout the country, over the rules public comment period to gin up support for a lot of different things, from an accessibility performance measure to measuring all modes of transportation and not just the speed of our vehicles moving through our roadways, but also including greenhouse gases as a measure. All indications point that the Obama administration is interested in getting this rule done before they leave next January, and including a greenhouse gas performance measure in the rule. This would be a huge opportunity. As you guys may know, our transportation sector now makes up the largest sector emitting greenhouse gases in the country as of this year. So this would be a great opportunity to start to measure and start to mitigate or diminish the greenhouse gases coming from our sector.
Thank you. How will the FAST Act impact bridge improvements needed across the country?
Fabulous question.
Oh, you like this one? Yeah.
Well, they've all been great, but this is one that's kind of like a bit nuanced, so just bear with me a little bit here, guys. So leading up to MAP 21, there was a specific dedicated bridge program. We went ahead and did away with the bridge program in MAP 21 and put their eligibilities and took their funds and put them into two programs in particular. One is the Surface Transportation Program, and one is the National Highway Performance Program. To give you a little bit of background, the National Highway Performance Program is primarily owned and controlled by your state DOT and supports our primary freeways and interstates throughout the country. Those bridges on those facilities are eligible for the National Highway Performance Program, making up the lion's share, more than 50% of our federal highway program on an annual basis. The other program, the Surface Transportation Program, also supports bridges, but only those bridges not on the interstate and not on not on the NHS. Which there are a few different bridge classifications there. What we ended up doing in this program, or in this bill, we didn't increase or dedicate funding necessarily for bridges, but we went ahead and addressed the gap that we saw within the bridges on that were eligible for Surface Transportation Program funds. It's the majority of your county-owned and your locally owned bridges that are eligible for federal funds. They've gone ahead and increased bridges that are off the NHS but on the federal highway system to make them eligible for NHPP, National Highway Performance Program dollars. That's, again, where most of the money is. By making that small eligibility fix, there's going to be a lot more bridges that we hope that are going to be fixed in a timely manner, so long as the states are willing to work with our county and our local elected officials. So that's one fairly not too large change, but it's one that's noticeable and one that I think could have some good positives coming from it.
Okay. Were there any changes to the federal, the FTA Section 5310 program?
Whew, 5310. Not many.
Okay. Has there been any discussion about making changes to MPOs, such as eliminating and or consolidating?
Great question. Not within the FAST Act and not really on Capitol Hill. I imagine many folks on the line are aware of what's called the MPO planning and coordination rulemaking process that's currently done. The USDOT released a rule, I want to say around July 4th, that encourages the consolidation of MPOs in areas where there's more than one MPO serving an urbanized area. This is a bit wonkish here, but some areas of the country have many MPOs within one urbanized area, and depends how you want to read the federal statute, the law, but Secretary Fox has had issues with MPOs, and not all MPOs, but he was a mayor at one point in an area of the country in Charlotte where there's as many as 5 or 6 MPOs and one RPO serving his area. He was the largest city there, and he had a challenge really kind of building consensus for the region to speak as a regional voice to be able to get the funding that was needed for the entire region. So I think he saw a little bit of an inefficiency there. We believe that there are some inefficiencies within the process, but that said, this program or this rule is drafted and dropped pretty late. A lot of people weren't aware that it came. The rule closes on the 26th of August for public comment. And ultimately what it would do, this is the nuts and bolts of it, if you are an MPO with more than one MPO in a UZA, an urbanized area, serving the same UZA, ultimately if the governor and the MPOs need to work together to determine whether or not the UZA needs more than one MPO. If the determination is that only one is needed, they will consolidate. They have 2 years to do so. If they don't consolidate, and if they determine that they don't need to be one MPO, they then have to develop joint planning products, the long-range plan, as well as your transportation improvement program. And they also have to develop joint performance measures and targets required under the new performance measure framework. This is a big challenge. Some days are very large. Chicago would go over to Indiana. The Northeast Corridor would go stretching from Baltimore up to New York through Philadelphia. So I think that in theory it's a good idea or concept. There might need some eligibility or exceptions in certain places. That rule is live. If you have further questions, you're more than welcome to contact us here. We're working with our partners and our members to really kind of figure out how we want to respond. But this is a priority for Secretary Fox, and so we need to make sure that we're addressing it in a proactive but manner in which we understand where he's coming from as well.
Okay, thanks. Are there any key changes that we need to know regarding NEPA under the FAST Act?
There are numerous changes, and this is a project, I think, in terms of legal work. MAP 21 went ahead and completely, I wouldn't say completely reformed, but went ahead and did a once-over on the program in terms of how it operates and how it functions. They then came back and put about another 100 pages into NEPA reform in this bill. Many of them are duplicative or run counterintuitive to what was passed in MAP 21, and now you have a lot of different things that are running counter to each other. I know that FHWA is trying to work out what that is and how it operates. I don't think that there are any major structural changes at this time. I think that some of the bigger stuff in terms of what can and can't be approved as planning products that then, once approved in an earlier stage, can then be approved and rolled into the NEPA process, are some of the larger items that were addressed within this. But I wouldn't say that there's large structural changes. I think the biggest question is how they actually are going to, MAP 21 and the FAST Act are going to operate together. And that's something that we're working out right now.
Okay, last question. I've been reeling these off for a good half hour. You've been doing really good. Will new or revised performance measures include metrics that better support Vision Zero goals, i.e. fatality injury rates?
Great question. So one of the areas that the performance measures needed to account for was the safety of our roadways. And when the rule came out, the proposed rule came out in 2014, they proposed to just account for those fatalities and serious injuries of travelers within a vehicle. We thought that that was too narrow and didn't take in the most vulnerable users in our system. So we worked with our friends in the bicycle and pedestrian advocacy space and our friends on the Hill to actually insert some language to require DOT to account for bicyclists and pedestrians as well. We're excited to announce, if you don't know, in March 2016 this year, they finalized the safety rule. They're going to account for all users of the roadway, including bicyclists and pedestrians, when setting measures and setting targets for safety. That is a huge opportunity, a great win for us, I think, on the Vision Zero front. On this measure that I highlighted earlier that closes tomorrow, talking about congestion and system performance, a bit wonky here, but what they decided to do was measure the system performance and the congestion of our roadways by simply measuring how fast our cars are moving, 7 different ways. We did that back in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and some communities are still doing that today. What you get there is sprawling communities with high-speed throughways trying to get people through a community and not to a community. By encouraging higher speeds, we're ultimately undermining the safety thresholds or measures that we were able to win on the safety performance measure. So we're very hopeful that we can get this measure heading in the right direction and looking at all modes of transportation when we assess the system performance as well as congestion. If we're not looking at least on congestion, those that choose not to drive, that walk, that bike, that take transit, we're only looking at the wrong side of the congestion and not the whole picture in a true manner. So we think that this is a very important rule. We've had 5,000 people throughout the country submit comments on our behalf through our website that we will be submitting tomorrow as well. We've got 150 local elected officials, NPOs, chambers, and civic organizations throughout the country, and 20 chambers saying the same thing. So we're hopeful that we're going to get this rule right. If it's not right, it only further encourages, I think, the outdated planning that runs counter to a lot of our Vision Zero efforts throughout the country.
Okay, it's time. Joe, thank you for joining us today. This was great, and we had a lot of folks on the call today, a lot of great questions. So thank you, and thanks to the Transportation Planning Division of APA for hosting the session. Again, it is approved for 1.5 CM credits. We'll post a recording of this session on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/planningwebcast, and a PDF of the presentation will be available shortly on our webcast webpage, which is ohioplanning.org/planningwebcast. So again, Joe, thank you, and everyone, we will talk next time. Thank you.
Thank you all.